I thought I was the luckiest man alive. I had a brilliant career, a beautiful home in Austin, and a wife, Ava, who was my entire world. But one night, while looking for a misplaced file, I found a hidden key. What it unlocked didn't just unravel our marriage, it exposed a dark secret her family had buried for decades. This is the story of how the woman I loved tried to make me the fall guy for a massive financial crime, and how I used my own skills to orchestrate her perfect downfall. This is more than a revenge story. It's a financial crime investigation that will leave you stunned. You won't believe how it ends. Listen to the full story to uncover the truth. If you enjoyed this video or found it helpful, go ahead and give it a like. It really helps me out. And if you haven't already, hit that subscribe button so you don't miss any future videos. Thanks a bunch. It all started with a misplaced blueprint. That sounds trivial, I know. But in my line of work as an architect, a blueprint is a map to a world yet to be built. It's a promise. And the one I was looking for, the final revision for the Harrison Tower, was the biggest promise of my career. I was hunting for it at 2 in the morning in my glass-walled office. The glittering lights of the Austin skyline spread out below me, like a blanket of fallen stars. The house was silent, except for the low hum of the air conditioning and the frantic thumping of my own heart. I'd been searching for over an hour. It wasn't on my desk, it wasn't in my flat files, it wasn't in the tubes by the door. And then I remembered. Ava, my wife, my beautiful, organized, perfect Ava, had tidied up my office earlier that week. Her version of tidying was less about cleaning and more about imposing her own flawless minimalist order onto my creative chaos. "You can't think in all this clutter, my love," she'd say, her voice like honey and lavender. I usually loved it. That night it filled me with a cold dread. I walked out of my office and up the floating oak staircase to our master bedroom. Ava was asleep, a perfect portrait of serenity, one delicate hand resting on the silk pillowcase. For a moment I just watched her. This woman I loved more than the logic of concrete and steel. This woman whose family had plucked me from a mid-level firm and given me the sky. Her father, Marcus Thorne, was a real estate titan. He hadn't just given me a job, he'd made me the lead architect for his company, Thorne Development. He treated me like a son. Ava treated me like a king. It was a fairy tale. Her closet was the size of a small bedroom, a temple of beige and white. Everything had its place. Shoes were aligned with military precision. Handbags were displayed on glass shelves like museum artifacts. It was there, behind a row of ridiculously expensive heels she never wore, that I saw it. A sleek, black safe deposit box. It wasn't a part of the closet's design, it was an addition, something foreign. My stomach clenched. I had never seen it before. My first thought was that the blueprint was inside. Maybe she thought it was so important it needed to be locked away. It was the kind of thing she'd do. A gesture of care that was both loving and completely controlling. But the box was locked. I searched for a key, running my hands along the shelves inside the drawers of her jewelry armoire. Nothing. My frustration was curdling into something else, something sharper. Suspicion. Why would she hide a key from me in our own home? Then, another memory surfaced, a birthday 2 years ago. I'd given her a first edition of The Fountainhead, my favorite novel. It was a ridiculously sentimental gift, but it meant the world to me. She'd smiled, kissed me, and said it was the most thoughtful present she'd ever received. She put it on the bookshelf in our library, but I hadn't seen it there in months. I crept back downstairs, my bare feet silent on the cold marble floors. The library was dark, smelling of old paper and leather. I scanned the shelves. It wasn't there. My eyes darted around the room, and I saw it, used as a decorative accent on a side table, propping up a porcelain bird. My book, my gift, reduced to a coaster. A bitter taste filled my mouth. I picked it up, my fingers tracing the faded gold lettering. It felt lighter than I remembered. I opened the cover and my breath caught in my throat. The inside was hollowed out. A perfect rectangular cavity had been carved into the pages, and nestled inside was a single small silver key. I stood there for what felt like an eternity, the hollowed-out book in my hands. It was a violation. She had gutted my most meaningful gift to me. To hide a key to a box I never knew existed. The fairy tale began to crack. Back in her closet, the key slid into the lock with a quiet, sickening click. The lid lifted to reveal not blueprints, but a single leather-bound ledger. My hands were trembling as I opened it. It wasn't just numbers. It was a story told in debits and credits, a language I understood all too well from managing project budgets. I saw names of shell corporations I'd never heard of. I saw wire transfers to offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands and Switzerland. And then I saw names I did know. Marcus Thorne, his brother, Declan, and then, my own, Liam Jacoby. My name was next to a series of payments for the Oakhaven Estates project, a luxury condo development I'd designed 2 years ago. I remembered the project, of course, but the numbers were wrong. They were inflated, monstrously so. A $10 million line item for specialized foundation materials that I knew for a fact had only cost $3. A $7 million payment to a subcontractor I'd never even hired. And next to these entries, a horrifyingly familiar signature. My signature, scanned and copied, or forged so perfectly I couldn't tell the difference. I felt the blood drain from my face. I sank to the floor, the plush carpet doing nothing to soften the blow. They weren't just cooking the books. They were using my projects, my name, my reputation as the oven. The prestige, the career, the beautiful house. It wasn't a gift. It was a cage. I was the respectable face on their criminal enterprise. The thought made me want to be sick. All the pieces started to click into place. The sudden promotions. The way Marcus would insist I personally sign off on every invoice, even for minor things, patting me on the back and calling me his detail man. The way Ava would help me with my paperwork when I was drowning in deadlines, organizing everything into neat piles for my signature. How many documents had I signed without reading, trusting the woman I loved? I closed the ledger and put it back in the box. I locked it and returned the key to its literary tomb. I walked back to our bedroom and stood over my sleeping wife. Her chest rose and fell in a steady, peaceful rhythm. Her face, which hours ago had been the epitome of love and beauty, now looked like a mask. I was trapped in a cognitive dissonance so profound it felt like vertigo. I loved this woman. This woman was destroying me. The next morning I decided to test the waters. Over breakfast I casually mentioned the Harrison Tower blueprint. Ava, honey, you didn't happen to move it, did you? I looked everywhere last night. She looked up from her yogurt, her brow furrowed with what looked like genuine concern. Oh no, sweetie. I haven't touched your office since Tuesday. Are you sure you remember where you put it? You've been so stressed lately, your memory's been a little foggy. She smiled, a gentle, chiding smile. Remember last week when you swore you'd lost the car keys and they were in your jacket pocket the whole time? I stared at her. The condescension was so subtle, so cloaked in affection, that a week ago I would have laughed and agreed with her. Now, it felt like a razor blade wrapped in silk. This was gaslighting in its purest form. She was making me question my own mind to cover her tracks. Maybe you're right, I said, forcing a smile. I'm probably just overworked. Of course I'm right, she said, reaching across the table to pat my hand. That's why you have me. To look after you. The conversation was a declaration of war. She wasn't just a participant in her family's scheme, she was my warden. Over the next few weeks, I lived a double life. By day, I was the doting husband and the star architect of Thorne Development. I laughed at Marcus's jokes. I let Ava help me with my work. I played the part of the slightly forgetful, overworked man who was so grateful for his perfect life. But by night, I was a forensic investigator. I bought a high-resolution scanner and encrypted hard drives. Every night, after she fell asleep, I would sneak downstairs, retrieve the key, and meticulously scan every single page of that ledger. I used my architectural software, designed for precision and detail, to build a different kind of structure. I created flowcharts mapping the movement of money. I cross-referenced every fraudulent transaction with my own project files, building a timeline that was irrefutable. I was creating a blueprint of their corruption. The deeper I dug, the uglier it got. It wasn't just tax evasion or money laundering. The money was coming from sources that made my skin crawl: extortion, racketeering. The Thorns weren't just crooked developers. They were criminals of the highest order, wearing suits and sipping champagne in their glass towers. The true moment of chilling clarity came a month after I found the key. I was in the library scanning the last few pages of the ledger when I saw a new entry, written in Ava's elegant script. It was a projection for a future transaction, the single largest one yet. A $50 million capital injection into the Harrison Tower project, funneled through a new shell company based in Panama. And next to the entry was a note: final disbursement, LJ to assume full liability. Asset transfer to follow. They were preparing the exit strategy. They were going to push through one last massive fraudulent deal, a deal so big it would inevitably attract federal attention. And they had built the entire paper trail to lead to one person. The lead architect. The man who signed all the documents. Me. They weren't just going to frame me, they were going to bankrupt me, imprison me, and then absorb my assets as a final insult. I looked at the note again. Asset transfer to follow. They were planning to take everything. The house, my savings, my professional license, my life. I felt a strange calm settle over me. The fear was gone, replaced by a cold, hard anger that was as solid and unyielding as granite. The part of me that loved Ava, the part that tried to make excuses, died in that library. I was no longer a victim in their play. I was a new character they hadn't accounted for. I closed the laptop, my own secret ledger of their sins safely stored and backed up in the cloud. I walked upstairs and looked at my wife, sleeping soundly, completely unaware that the man she thought she was playing had just declared a game of his own. I leaned in close, my lips almost touching her ear, and whispered into the darkness so softly that not even the air could hear it. The game is on. If you enjoyed this video or found it helpful, go ahead and give it a like. It really helps me out. And if you haven't already, hit that subscribe button so you don't miss any future videos. Thanks a bunch. For the next 2 months, I became the greatest actor of my generation. I played the role of Liam Jacobi, loving husband, with an Oscar-worthy devotion. I brought Ava flowers, I praised her exquisite taste. I let her help me organize my files, smiling my gratitude, while my internal servers were meticulously documenting every move she made. I even feigned forgetfulness, allowing her to remind me of meetings or deadlines, all while I was building a case against her and her family that would have made the FBI weep with joy. The learned helplessness she had cultivated in me became my camouflage. She saw a man who was pliable, manageable. She had no idea she was looking at a demolition expert who was patiently planting charges at the foundation of her entire world. My evenings were no longer spent designing buildings of glass and steel, but deconstructing a fortress of lies. My architectural software was perfect for the task. I created 3D models, not of skyscrapers, but of their money laundering network. Each shell corporation was a floor, each wire transfer a structural beam. I traced the money from its dirty origins to its final destination, laundered clean through the concrete and rebar of the buildings I had designed. It was a monument to their greed, and I had the blueprints to tear it all down. I even discovered the why. Marcus Thorne's legitimate businesses were failing. The entire Thorne empire was a house of cards, propped up by a constant influx of dirty money. My projects weren't just a way to clean cash. They were the life support machine keeping the whole rotten enterprise from collapsing. They weren't just setting me up to take the fall, they were preparing to cash me in like a life insurance policy to save themselves. The final piece of my plan fell into place when Ava came into my office one evening, her eyes sparkling with excitement. "Darling, you'll never guess," she said, draping her arms around my neck. "Texas Business Monthly is doing a cover story on Daddy. They're naming him Developer of the Decade. There's going to be a huge gala at the Four Seasons to celebrate. It's the biggest night of his life, of our lives." I looked into her beautiful, treacherous face and felt nothing but ice in my veins. This was it. The moment of their ultimate hubris. They wanted to stand on a stage, bathed in applause and admiration, right before they fed me to the wolves. They were throwing a party for their own victory. It was perfect. I was going to turn their coronation into an execution. I didn't want to just go to the police. A quiet arrest wouldn't be enough. They would tie it up in court for years, using the best lawyers their stolen money could buy. I didn't want justice, I wanted immolation. I wanted their public downfall to be as spectacular and as carefully constructed as the towers they built. I created a new anonymous email address and a secure VPN. I drafted a message to a journalist named Sarah Jenkins. She was a tenacious, hungry investigative reporter at a major online news outlet, known for breaking stories that toppled powerful men. I didn't just send her a data dump. That would be messy, unprofessional. I was an architect. I gave her a blueprint. My email was titled, "The Real Architecture of Thorne Development." Inside, I had attached a single password-protected file. The body of the email was simple: "Miss Jenkins, you think you know the story of Marcus Thorne. You don't. The real story is attached. It's a structure of fraud, extortion, and deceit. I've given you the floor plans, the wiring diagrams, and the key. The password is Icarus's. I suggest you publish on the night of the Developer of the Decade Gala. It would be a shame for the party to be based on a lie. The file contained everything: the scanned ledger, my flowcharts, a detailed 30-page narrative I had written, explaining every transaction, every forged signature, every shell company. I laid out the entire financial crime investigation for her on a silver platter, so clear and concise that a child could understand it. I highlighted how they used my name and reputation as a shield. I made it the easiest, most explosive story of her career. I hit send and felt the first real clean breath I had taken in months. The night of the gala was a surreal spectacle. The ballroom at the Four Seasons was dripping with crystal and orchids. The most powerful people in Texas were there, schmoozing and sipping champagne. I stood beside Ava, my hand resting on the small of her back, a perfect picture of a proud son-in-law. She was radiant in a silver gown, her smile as bright and false as a searchlight. "Look at all this, Liam," she whispered, squeezing my arm. "This is just the beginning for us. Once the Harrison Tower is done, the sky's the limit." She had no idea how right she was. The end was just beginning. Marcus took the stage to a thunderous ovation. He was a master showman, weaving a tale of hard work and vision, of building a better Austin. He talked about integrity. He talked about legacy. I watched him from my table, my expression a carefully crafted mask of admiration. Ava was crying, dabbing her eyes with a napkin. "He's just so amazing," she murmured. As Marcus reached the crescendo of his speech, I felt a subtle vibration in my pocket, and then another, and then the entire room started to buzz. A low hum that grew into a wave of whispers. Heads were bent over glowing phone screens. Faces were shifting from celebratory to confused, then to shocked. The article had just dropped. Sarah Jenkins had timed it to the second. The headline was a cannon blast: Developer of the Decade or Kingpin of Deceit. The criminal empire behind Thorn Development. I watched as Marcus's CFO, a man named Peterson, rushed to the side of the stage, his face ashen. He showed his phone to Marcus. I saw the blood drain from my father-in-law's face. The practiced smile froze, then crumbled. The applause had died, replaced by an unnerving electric silence. Ava was staring at her own phone, her mouth hanging open. Her eyes, wide with horror, darted around the room and then, finally, landed on me. She saw it then, the truth. She saw the man who had been playing a role. The love and admiration in my eyes were gone, replaced by something as cold and hard as a judge's gavel. I didn't need to say a word. I just held her gaze, letting her see the full scope of what I had done. I had not only discovered her treachery, I had architected its absolute destruction. The panic in her eyes was a more satisfying victory than any courtroom verdict ever could be. I gave her a small, almost imperceptible nod, a final silent acknowledgement. Then I turned, straightened my tie, and walked out of the ballroom. I didn't run. I walked with the calm, steady pace of a man who had just finished a long and difficult job. As I pushed through the doors into the cool night air, I could hear the chaos erupting behind me. Shouts, gasps, the frantic cacophony of an empire collapsing in on itself. The aftermath was exactly what I had designed. The story went viral. The feds, armed with my perfectly laid out investigation, descended on Thorn Development the next morning. Arrests were made: Marcus, Declan, Peterson, and Ava. She tried to pin it all on me, of course. She told them I was the mastermind, a disgruntled architect who had manipulated the family. But my evidence was too clean, too precise. I had included a final personal file for the investigators, detailing the gaslighting, the manipulation, the hollowed-out book. I had become the prosecution's star witness. I never spoke to her again. She sent letters from a pre-trial detention center. Desperate, rambling letters filled with rage, then pleas, then pathetic attempts at seduction. I burned them all without reading past the first line. I sold the house, liquidated my shared assets, and moved. I left Austin behind, a city whose skyline I had helped shape but which now felt like a mausoleum. It's been a year. I live in Denver now. My apartment has a view of the mountains, solid and real and ancient. I'm working for a small ethical firm that designs community centers and public parks. The money isn't what it used to be, but for the first time in years I feel rich. Sometimes at night, I'd pull out a fresh sheet of paper and just sketch. No clients, no budgets, no expectations. I just draw. Buildings that are honest, structures that are true. It's a quiet life, a simple one. And as I put the pencil to the paper, laying down the lines for a new foundation, I know with absolute certainty that for the first time in a very long time, the structure is sound.